Spanish, so she's excellent. Hello, waiting to see if Facebook appears. The voices. We're recording. Okay, I'm going to start like hello while we're waiting to see about Facebook, but we are recording. So while we're recording, I can say good morning to everyone and welcome to History Matters. Okay, coffee really does.
I copied.
There we go. I think preparing live stream, and there we go. Now Facebook is here too. Hello, Facebook. Okay, so boy, do we have a topic today. Just, it's always been the case that within any, I was going to say 24-hour period, but now it's like really within any given hour, the dynamics of everything changes. So this now seems to be the thing that we're going to be talking about this week, and I'm guessing not only this week, but we can start. But before I plunge into that, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. And as always, I'm delighted to be with you here on Friday morning. I'm ready to dig into today's topic. While we are chatting away over here in Zoom land, and I'm sure y'all doing the same over there in Facebook, I do want to remind you that if you have specific questions for today's topic, we would love for you to add those throughout the talk in the Q&A down below. And in about 30 minutes, I'll come back and we'll have a discussion. I'll see you in a little bit.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. Well, the title that I gave today's session, I just love already. The emojis are floating. The topic for today, I think I called it going low and going high, maybe. Obviously sort of hearkening back to Michelle Obama's original comment about, when they go low, we go high. And just within the last 48 hours, some of the going low that we're seeing is going lower by the moment. And so I thought, particularly given that this is not going to go away, that we should talk a little bit about what we're seeing, about the meaning of what we're seeing, a little bit about the historical context of the sorts of things that we're seeing, basically to look at the meaning and the implications and the dynamics, historical context for the fire hose of mud, to put it nicely, that we're watching before us now. When they go low, we go high. We're not in that place anymore. This makes me think of like somehow the Wizard of Oz, like not in Kansas anymore. Things have changed, and that's the sort of thing that I want to talk about today. I will also say, I should have said at the outset, if there are people who are here for the first time, please go into chat and say so, because the Amazing History Matters community is an amazing community, and you will get a robust welcome for joining us. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit. Maybe I don't want to, but I feel compelled to talk a little bit about political smut coming particularly from politicians. This is not, in some ways, this is not new. Right? It's hardly new. Certainly free-flowing smut of various sorts, not new. Free-flowing racist smut, not new. Free-flowing sexist smut, really not new. So there are aspects of this. It's not as though we're seeing aspects of this for the first time. As ever, given our particular moment and the climate that we're in and the mix of things that we are facing in this political moment, there are things that are distinctive to what's going on now. But before I come to now, I want to talk a little bit about how this sort of thing played out in the past. And not surprisingly, given what's lurking over my shoulder there, one of the things that immediately came to mind when I began thinking about this was the 19th century Congress and the fact that, routinely speaking, Southerners tended to go low, meaning that they were violent and nasty and threatening, and Northerners tended to go high, which means that they did not respond in the same way. And I think I've talked before about the wonderful phrase that John Quincy Adams, who went back to Congress, he served in the House after his presidency, which is always noteworthy. So he goes back And in his wonderful diary, which I think is mostly online at the Massachusetts Historical Society, I'll throw that in there. He talks about, he'll mention some kind of fight or argument or someone pulling a gun on someone or whatever it is that he talks about in his diary. And then he will say, and this is almost a verbatim quote, and then the lamentation speeches started. And by lamentation speeches, which I think is a wonderful phrase, what he was saying is whenever something horrible happened in the House, Northerners would then immediately say, the dignity of the House, the rules of the House as an institution. What does this mean about Congress? They would sort of immediately go high, right? So some Southerner runs at someone with a cane or pulls a gun or says, meet you at the dueling ground or whatever, insults him, does something really, really going low. And a Northerner, typically a group of them, would respond by saying, oh, but the dignity of the House. Lamentation speeches. That's really typical. That's, in a sense, not hard to find when you look at the equivalent of the congressional record throughout a good chunk of the first half, certainly the 1830s and the 1840s. That's what you see. So you do have, on the one hand, going low, and on the other hand, the immediate response is going high. Now, the going high didn't stop the going low, right? So this is an important point, which I'll come back to, but it's not as though Southerners did something just like way low, and that the Northerners protested and the Southerners said, you're right. We've crossed the line. No, they were doing that for a purpose, right? They were doing that to intimidate and silence their opponents. They were doing that to show off to people back home who, particularly as the conflict in the United States becomes truly sectional and not so much focused on parties, they're showing off to Southerners, like, look what we're doing to these guys, like these weak Northerners here. They were doing what they were doing for a purpose. So although Northerners logically said, this is bad, you shouldn't do this, you're hurting the institution of Congress, you're hurting democratic governance, all the things you would expect someone to say, why would that stop Southerners when they were doing what they were doing for a reason and raking in what they wanted? They were appealing and getting applauded by Southerners, not always, but often. And they were intimidating and silencing at least some Northerners, right? So it worked. They did it for a reason and they got their goal. Now, here we are at a much different moment. And I've already talked before about how we have seen generally with the Harris campaign staff, the PR staff, and at the Democratic National Convention, we are seeing Democrats behave differently than traditionally they have. In many ways, traditionally, for a while at least, the Democratic Party, second half of the 20th century, maybe not even that full second half of the 20th century, but they generally have been the ones saying, wait, the institution of whatever, they've been sort of standing up for the rules and for institutions and doing the right thing. And at least in the semi-recent past, there have been some Republicans and now MAGA folk who are not as interested in upholding appearances and really are engaged in a different kind of strategy. And so the Democratic Party, generally speaking, has been but this is bad party. And as I've said before, even in recent weeks here on History Matters, they're behaving differently now. They're pushing back. Sometimes, as I talked about at some point in very recent weeks, right, they're using humor. They're not necessarily being malicious, but they're using humor. Sometimes they're simply standing up and pointing to something and saying, yeah, no, or we see that for what it is, but they're pushing back. However, in recent days, and even just recent, 48 hours, we've been seeing new depths of lowness appearing. And I'm not going to repeat some of that smut that has been floating around. You can find it really easily, but there have been what some folks are calling rapey jokes about Harris and why she wouldn't be a good president because in the Situation Room, generals would do bad things to her. I won't go further than that. There have been, I think maybe is it Vance who put out on social media some image of a beauty queen with a sash and said, I have here Harris making her with her CNN interview or some such thing. Again, I'm not going to repeat it, but what we're now getting is like new depths of sexist, particularly sexist, scorn, smirking, belittling a woman and thus women in the most blatantly, I want to say unbelievable way, but I can't say unbelievable, but off the charts. Except now I would say there are no charts because it's just going to get worse, right? That now we're seeing depths of insult along the same lines, cast your mind back. There was a certain point at which things were happening that the people, but particularly MAGA folk, were throwing into the mix of politics, and you would think to yourself, like, it can't possibly be happening like that. How could that possibly be happening? And in a way, you just can't say that anymore because we're so far downstream from what's typical in any kind of a campaign environment. But it's going to get worse. It is believable because this is where we are. We're at a moment where, because the Harris campaign has momentum, what we're seeing a lot on the opposite side is a real desperation to get the attention of the media, to intimidate people, right? Into maybe not speaking up or not protesting too loudly or whatever it is, intimidate people into not piping up. There's not really content coming out from a lot of these MAGA folk, and in particularly former President Trump. We have people being deliberately outrageous, insulting, nasty to get attention and to pump themselves up in the public eye as, I don't know, macho and look at us, we're leaders, however that is currently being defined. Now, given that the purpose of this is to get media attention and to detract from whatever it is from what the Harris campaign is trying to say, and given that when you get that smutty with your comments, that, yeah, you're going to get media attention. In some ways, people who are offering that kind of content are kind of getting what they want, right? They're kind of getting, if they want attention, they're getting it. If they want to be deliberately outrageous and insulting, maybe hoping some of it will rub off on their opposition, definitely hoping that people will take account for it, whether they're outraged or whether they cheer it on and engage in more of that kind of behavior. In a sense, it's working. So that leaves us, in an interesting kind of situation. What do you do when you have deliberate deployment of mud to get attention? And not surprisingly, it gets attention. Now, I will say, I'll go a little further back in time to say, it's not as though this kind of mudslinging was invented somehow in the 19th century. It's not as though it only took place in Congress. The thing about Congress is it was a closed arena with the press always there watching and then able to broadcast what was happening there around the country increasingly quickly. And as I talked about many times before, because I'm always fascinated in technology and democracy, the telegraph meant that whatever was said on the floor of Congress, including nasty mudslinging, smutty stuff, 45 minutes and the entire country would know. But it's not as though that's the only time this happened. You can go all the way back in time. And I had the most ridiculous sort of moment this morning, and I meant to, like, if I had time, I was going to run and get my own book, because I know in my own book that I actually note this and I couldn't find it. But you go all the way back to, I believe, the presidential election of 1800, and someone called John Adams hermaphroditic, and when you look that up, when you Google that, what you get are a lot of people saying that Jefferson called Adams hermaphroditic, which might have been the case, but I'm not going to trust historians quoting other historians that that's what happened. And I couldn't find the original document. I didn't have enough time to find the original document. Regardless, that was floating around again. And they were talking often in these early elections about masculinity and manliness and leadership qualities and suggesting a candidate was a coward or effeminate or worse. This happened at the time. More often than not, it was the press tossing that stuff and not necessarily candidates. But again, there's a long, long, not glorious history of using this kind of stuff because, surprise, it attracts attention. It gets the attention of the press. It gets the attention of the people. Hundreds of years later, we're still like, I think he called him a hermaphrodite, right? That kind of stuff sticks. It has an impact. And so there's a reason why it's being used. But part of what makes or made the difference in the 19th century, not surprisingly, is the technology, is the fact that suddenly whatever was happening on a small scale, and newspapers in the late 18th century had a reach, but obviously the telegraph dwarfed that. And now what we're seeing, and this is social media to a large extent, is these kinds of nasty comments being flung around. And because of social media, because, you know, in a way, we don't have the massive force that used to be Twitter being, you know, the sort of place where people collected. No, now we have multiple places and multiple venues and multiple outlets for this sort of stuff to spread, in a sense, making it harder to track where it comes from because it's everywhere. But so that is the moment that we're in which there's a nasty post, tweet, fill in the noun for whatever you want to call it, that's thrown out, and then suddenly it appears everywhere. And then, you know, certainly I find myself saying, did it start with him? Did it start with, you know, the former president Trump puts something out on Truth Social, which I do not look at, I have to say, and I immediately think, well, that's probably not his, so where did he get it from? And what does it mean that he put it on there? Again, as a former president, well, we know what that means. Look at me, I'm getting attention and I'm a macho dude, so I can say this nasty stuff. Where it comes from, the source of it, where it's going, who's reading it, all of that stuff, as we know with our long history of being the History Matters community, it all matters because the medium shapes the message. But it's very hard, or harder than it has been, to track the paths, the pathways of this and where it comes from and where it's going, which is why, in a sense, it's so effective. So what do you do in this kind of climate? How do you operate, particularly when there's an ongoing fire hose of nastiness? It's going to get increasingly nasty, increasingly racist, increasingly sexist, because that gets attention. And because it presents a challenge. How do you respond to that, right? You don't want to like promote it by engaging in that kind of argument. You don't want to give it more press. We saw on the CNN interview last night, and I unfortunately missed the beginning of it. I saw probably the second half, but we did see, I think it was in the first half, so I didn't see it, when Harris was asked about former President Trump's comment about her turning black, suddenly turning black. And Harris responded by saying something like, same old playbook, next question. And the person doing the interview, Dana Bash, said, is that it? And Harris said, that's it. Next question. I thought that was actually quite well done. It's like, okay, she was asked a question that, why? Like, you know, here's some bait, take it, as though she was going to, you know, now I'm going to start talking about race. It's really striking that basically, and we could talk about this during the Q&A, but Harris is not playing up gender, is not playing up race. She's running as a candidate with something serious and important to do when it comes to the work of democracy. And the other side, the MAGA folk, keep throwing gender and race at her. And I think the smart response is, yeah, there they are doing that again. Yep, there they are. You know, like my what I called my abolitionist toreador, Joshua Giddings from Ohio, who would deliberately say provoking things so that he would get a Southerner to run at him screaming with a weapon or a cane raised, and he would do a version of same old playbook, like, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the barbaric South. And then the person would sort of shrink, the Southerner would shrink, and then Giddings would go back to whatever he was doing. I think that that's an effective way of dealing with this, is to not stoop to the level of the smut, but essentially to say, yeah, well, that's what they do, isn't it? Like, they're gonna play race, they're gonna play gender, and that's what they're gonna do. And I'm not jumping into that mud pit. Um, call it out for what it is. So what we saw last night was Harris not taking, excuse me, the bait, but calling out the comment for what it is, right? I thought that was done really effectively. So in a way, to go back to Michelle Obama, we are no longer in a place of, when they go low, we go high. But we are not in a place of when they go low, we go low. I don't think that the best strategy for confronting the sort of racist, sexist smut that's being tossed, the best way to respond to that, I don't think, is to respond in kind. That's a strategy of intimidation and attention getting. I think not necessarily going high by not noticing it, but certainly saying, yeah, okay, we notice it and it's smutty. And we think it's bad and nasty. So not going high, but just sort of coming right back at it and doing what I say over and over and over again, pushing back. Don't take the bait. Don't sort of wallow into that mud pit. Just point it out for what it is. Call it out for what it is. Like, okay, yeah, they said this nasty thing because they really want attention, and it's nasty. And don't they have something better to say? Next question. So unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, I'm almost running out of time here. I'm sorry to say this is going to get worse because increasingly, something won't be quite outrageous enough to get the kind of attention that people want when they say it. So they'll find ways to be worse and more insulting. And I'm not even going to try to predict how low it's going to go. What is that called? The poll that you limbo, right? Is that it? You played limbo? I can't see chat, but I think it's a limbo poll, right? Where you squeeze your way underneath it. That's what I was thinking of this morning. Like, how low can we go? It's going to get really low. And we know that. Okay, I see thumbs up. Thank you. That's what I thought it was called. It's going to get worse. And we know that it's going to get worse. So the logical question, the good question to ask is, strategically speaking, what's the best way to confront that so that you, number one, don't do any harm to yourself, and number two, ideally, do harm to the smut throwers, not by engaging in that behavior, but by simply saying, I offer to you the barbaric South in some way, so that you can't stop them from doing what they're doing, but you can call it out for what it is. We are going to habit seeing and are going to see the sorts of things that gave the founding generation some angst about a democratic politics, which is at its foundation, it's about engaging public sentiment, engaging the public, getting them to respond emotionally in some way to what politicians are saying so that you can sway their vote. And under good conditions, you're offering ideas and visions of the nation, and the public can respond to that. Under not ideal conditions of the sort that gave great feelings of angst to the founding generation, you get demagogues who are willing to do or say anything as long as it sways the public towards their side. Lies, nastiness, appealing to their emotions. It's hard to control that, but it's easy to provoke that. And that's one of the vulnerabilities of a democratic politics. So that's, in a sense, what we're watching, and what we will be watching, sadly, until certainly election day. It's going to be attempts to pull at the emotions, probably in the nastiest and lowest way possible, because it's going to have to get more extreme to get that amount of attention, to get people to pay attention to the people throwing the mud, and ideally for the people throwing that mud, for some of it to stick. This is a really interesting moment because some of the what Harris called the old playbook is not working so well right now. And that's why I've said this before, like, some of the MAGA folk are like throwing spaghetti, hoping some of it's going to stick to the wall. And more often than not, it isn't. That's really interesting. I mean, as ever, political historian brain is like, what an interesting moment where they're, playing with being outrageous to see what resonates. And, American citizen brain is just like, just stop. This is so low. This is so dispiriting. It's so, I'm not even going to go on. It is fascinating from a political historian point of view. It is beyond discouraging from an American citizen point of view. It's also a reminder of the high stakes of what we're watching, of this election, because the depths of lowness are coming out, and the desperation is coming out because this election is so important, because it's actually close. I saw this morning, I guess, I didn't look into the story, that I guess in Texas they were raiding the houses of some Latino voters. I don't know the facts. I'm not going to say more than that because I don't want to spread lies. But someone did say, I saw floating by me on social media this morning, that if that's the case and if that's happening, then it means Texas is in play because they're really panicking and doing things that are more extreme than they've done before. So at any rate, my larger point here is we're going to be seeing more of this. It's going to come in different shapes and forms, given technology. They'll find new ways to do it. They'll find ways to make it unclear who's saying what. They'll find ways to make things more visual than verbal. Who the heck knows what's going to happen? As ever, anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen, they're lying to you. But we can predict more of the same. And the important part is to realize the goal of it is to provoke, to get attention, and to provoke an emotional reaction. So as ever, as we've been saying for years here on History Matters, if you have a strong emotional response to something coming out from the political world, pause and consider if someone wants you to have that response and what that means, right? Doesn't mean that it's bad to have the response. But so, for example, when we saw Gus Walz at the Democratic convention cry and be so proud and point to his father and say, that's my dad, that's my dad. I certainly had a strong emotional response to that. That's a moment where you pause for a moment and think to yourself, what am I watching? And what it certainly seemed like was a sincere response from a son being proud of his father. That emotion made perfect sense. But it makes perfect sense to just pause if you find yourself having a big emotional response, because that's not the kind of example I'm pointing to, which is sometimes the outrageous memes and language and stuff like that. It's just there to get a response from the press, from the public. That's what it is. Look at me. Look at me. That's all it is. And if that's the case, you need to pause and think about the fact that that's what it is. So before you get outraged, before you fight back, pause and consider why people are throwing this kind of smut at you, because they're going to be doing it for a strategic reason. And you want to know that reason before you respond. And I can say firsthand, it's really hard to pause and take that breath, particularly the lower the smut goes. It's really hard. I am bound up in emotions all the time, and beyond angry sometimes. And I spend a lot of time saying, like, okay, take a breath, because what they want is for you to howl in outrage and then change the dynamic and the nature of the conversation, which is not quite what it is at this point. But at any rate, whatever's happening now and down the pike, as ever, the lesson of this, or one lesson of this, is it's being done to get attention and to intimidate. So before you give it attention and before you emotionally respond to it, pause and consider the strategy, the logic behind it, and then decide how you want to respond. That's being savvy, and that's being political in a good sense. Political meaning I understand this is politics. So how do I want to respond in this political moment? Okay, I'm 2 minutes over. My apologies. I beamed. There you go. I beamed in just in time to see like this little bug appearing in the Q&A. I will say for those who are new here, oh, I even forgot which is. This is 225, 6, 4, 31.
One. Carolee is still here.
231, man. Okay.
231.
So this is so what I have done for 231 weeks is I know I know. I remember thinking this was going to be like 2 months. For 231 weeks, I've produced a mug that has something to do with the topic under discussion. I do not have 231 mugs. so sometimes I've called people to travel with me to somehow relate my mug to what we're talking about. Um, I don't think this one's going to require a lot of traveling. I haven't used it in a while, and I'm going to require, I might require a reminder for part of this. But anyway, this is a mug from the days when Matt was my partner in crime, the pre-Annie days. And it's the pomp and crest for the
I
door.
love the pomp and
89.
crest mug.
Now, here's why I brought this up. So the pomp and crest bug is because there was actually it's more related than I even imagined when I pulled the mug. So it comes from a 1789 newspaper satire in which there were men at the time who were panicked because women had gotten a sense of political involvement during the revolution. Now we have the new government starting, and women are wanting to be involved in politics. What does that mean? So there was a satirical newspaper account in which they created a woman, Roxana something Pompencrest. I can't, Roxana Wilhelmina Pompencrest.
Yep.
And she was applying to be the doorkeeper of Congress. And it clearly is making fun of women and of this particular woman. You know, my hair is tall enough that I will intimidate people. You know, it's ridiculous satire, and how shocking and ridiculous it would be for, she has pretty high hair there, for a woman to be the doorkeeper of Congress. I pulled this because when I went searching for a mug, I thought about the rapey comments being made about Harris, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice just to say, oh, you're out the door. You're gone. Slam. We have no place for that. So we don't have a doorkeeper. But it definitely made me think that in some ways it would be nice when people get beneath a certain level to just say, you know, I don't want you in this room right now. So go talk outside, come back when you're going to behave civilly in some way. So the doorkeeper of smut, I guess, is part of what I was offering with that mug. And I haven't used it for a long time, I think. Roxana Wilhelmina Pompencrest. Anyway, so this was a Made for History Matters mug. At any rate, okay. And there's some people, it's new to some people. So, okay, let us move on to questions and answers.
We have plenty. Okay, our good friend James Dennis asked, what is the most hilarious political smut you've come across, and what was the context for it?
Oh, the most hilarious. That's a of all time, that's big. Well, here's one I thought of this morning. I'm not going to say I'm not good at the most game, like my favorite movie, my favorite color, my favorite. I can never do that because I like too many. But I thought of this morning, and again, didn't have time to get the absolute details, but I believe it's from the election of 1800, maybe from the election of 17. No, it must be 1800. And John Adams was accused of, I believe this is John. I think it's John Adams, was accused of somehow or other, like hiring prostitutes to give to people as bribes, and it was like a ridiculous smutty. Right? Thank you for that's the proper expression, Annie. It was some kind of I'm sure it won't be hard to find, but it was like you know, somehow or other using prostitutes to bribe foreign ministers or whatever. I don't know. It had to do with John Adams and prostitutes. And Adams' reply was something like, you know, the story's not true, but if it were, I haven't gotten my share yet. It was like, where are my prostitutes? I deserve some.
Wow.
And I was like, John Adams, man. I always say he has the best sense of humor of any of the founder folk. That stands out. So it wasn't the insult that was funny, but the response was. And I'll see if someone might be able to find it. I don't know if the word used was prostitute, so I don't know if you could go to Founders Online and find this. I'll see if I can, and if I can, I'll find a way to spread it. But anyway, and it actually probably is in my first book. It's lurking over there, so I can't look it up. Anyway, okay.
All right, that was a good one to open us up. Okay, Troy asks, in a self-governing society, aren't intentionally low information voters the real threat? If so, how do we augment simply conversing with them to get them to the point where they can start carrying on their own?
Right. Well, so yeah, so this is the, you know, a vulnerability of democracy. democracy is, we the people have the power. And we the people, it would be good if all of we the people were informed and correctly informed in the same way. And that has never been and will never be humanly possible. So yeah, part of the vulnerability of democracy is that people need to be educated and informed, and you can't make people be educated and informed. And there's a reason why, and we've talked about this before, that education was immediately became a topic of discussion when the new republic was launched under the Constitution. And people on all levels were saying, okay, now we got to deal with education. Now we need, Jefferson saying that we should have everyone gets at least 3 years of school. And why is even women, they started like preparing for women's education. Shocking in early America. But the reason for it was that Americans needed to be informed, they needed to be educated, they needed to understand how the government works, they needed to understand what threats to the new government looked like. And women needed this as well, because they would be bringing up future generations of children that needed to have that kind of information too. So yes, we're supposed to be informed as American citizens. It has never been the case. I say this a lot. There has been no golden time in American history when it was all wonderful and everyone was fill in the blank. So we will never have a moment when everyone is informed in the way that they need to be the most effective kind of public that a democratic republic needs. Yes, that is an important thing. That is a vital thing. And we are watching two things. We are watching in real time what happens when people aren't informed. Worse, even, we're watching in real time what happens when you, even like anyone, even the informed people who read all the time and think about this stuff all the time, we can't tell the difference between what's real and what isn't. And that's not going to get easier either. So even if you're informed, as you should be as a voter, it takes effort to know what to believe and to sort out reality from smut and manipulation. That is a concrete threat to democratic governance. It just is. And we are in that moment. Any kind of technology that plays with reality in this way, we're kind of in a Wild West moment as far as that's concerned, because we don't know what it can do or how much it can do or the best way to respond. And once we finally figure out a way to confront this in a useful way, there'll be some new something that comes along, some new technology, some new something that'll make it complicated once again, because it's strategic, it's deliberate, it can be played for advantage. But I do see floating by here. I saw something about, I'm not gonna be able to find it by skimming back. But anyway, obviously, there are a lot of educators here. Education and teaching students the importance of thinking about this before believing something, and how to try and differentiate truth from lies, right? We need to make students more sophisticated, upcoming students more sophisticated in thinking about these kinds of things, so that they at least have alarm bells that go off and give them the moment to take a breath and consider what they're seeing before absorbing it.
Yeah, one of the groups that we work with very often in teachers is iCivics, and they've done a great job of, they've created things like dashboards where kids can go in and fact check things. There's another organization, Checkology, that's a piece of free software where kids can learn how to look for bias in media. And so there's been a lot more of that, as you can imagine, in the last couple of years, especially as school went back this month. Lots of resources for teachers and kids to prepare for the election, how to spot a fake ad and all that kind of stuff. So
which is really good. And I know that's been happening for a little while, but I can't
they've ramped it up a bit, as you can imagine.
Good. I can't applaud it often enough. So
yeah. Okay, Kathy Porter, longtime friend of our community. Kathy asks, how can we push back at blatant lies from people, and she lists a few people, but I don't think we need to list all of them, especially since journalists don't seem to be able to effectively call out lies like post-birth abortion. So she's talking about politicians going on TV and just flat out lying, even though they know they're going to get fact checked. But I think more importantly, why are the journalists not effectively calling them out? What do we
Yeah,
do?
I can't speak for the press right now. I really can't. And that might be next week's conversation. I don't know, but and I don't like to attack the press generally because we desperately need the press for any kind of democratic governance. Some parts of the press right now are really, really playing by old rules. And if you're talking about both sides, if you're normalizing things that are happening right now, you are just not in the moment. You are, and we need to be thinking in different ways. We need to be thinking, asking new questions, I think. But so the question is, like, what do you do when you see those kinds of lies? Part of the answer, and this is not going to solve the problem at all, but part of the answer is certainly calling it out for what it is, right? And we don't know how this is going to end yet, but so the sort of stunt that the Trump campaign pulled at Arlington Cemetery, sort of violating the law by holding a campaign event there, and supposedly, and again, I can't vouch for this because I have not researched it for myself, but what I read this morning from several news outlets is that they wanted to create some kind of a commercial or something that they could use. They wanted to make what was going on there look like a formal event, and then they wanted to accuse the Harris campaign of not showing up for it. I don't know how much of that is true or is not true. But the fact of the matter is, it was staged. It was not allowable. Then there became these crazy stories about the Park Service person who tried to interrupt it and prevent it from happening, who I guess they shoved to get by her, and then they claimed she was mentally unwell. This is like, it goes on and on. It's snowballing. But what's interesting is the response to it has been, yeah, okay, that's ugly. That's illegal. That's really obviously lowball politics. So people, not just the press, but like people on social media and the press have been saying that's scummy. Like, we know what that was. And I'm sure for some people, whatever ad they created out of it, whatever claims they're making, they'll buy them. But right now, at least, it appears to me that whole episode is so clouded over with the nastiness that underlies it, that I think it's going to be less effective than it was intended to be, because it's not going to slide right in there as like, look at this grand patriotic moment. It was a deliberate political moment. It was messy. It was not well done. And now it's not pretty anymore. So part of the answer, that's a very long way of saying, call things out, name things for what they are, do it loudly, and don't just say, you're a liar, say, yeah, no, like that's illegal. Here's the law. I just was doing this all over the place on social media in the last day or so, because suddenly the press, some of the press were, and as well as others, were saying, boy, Harris needs Walz as a crutch. Why isn't she doing this interview all by herself? So, people were passing around images, screenshots, whatever, of every other president in the recent past doing an interview with the vice presidential candidate at their side. This is a convention. Normally it happens a little bit after the convention, when the candidates have formally taken on the nomination for themselves, and then the team meets and does something with the press to talk about who they are. This is not some new bizarre thing that Harris has instituted because she's weak. It's what happens. We have photographic evidence. So to me, my response was, really? Because here's an image of every other presidential candidate doing the exact same thing. Guess what? This isn't new. This has nothing to do with Harris being a woman, because the implication there is, oh, she's weak, so she needs a crutch, right? And she's weak. Why? In part, because she is a black woman. She can't do this. She's not good at it. She's not good on her feet, right? She needs someone there. That's all of that is underlying, the crazy attack for something that's absolutely normal. There's nothing about what she did that is abnormal. It suggests nothing than that she's a normal candidate doing what you do. after a convention, right? So that was an example where, and it wasn't me, there were people all over the place online saying, particularly historians saying, yeah, no, this is pretty normal. This is what happens. And I don't remember seeing anyone accusing any of these other presidents of needing a crutch by having their vice presidential candidate at their side. So that's, does it solve the problem? No. Is it useful to not scream and howl back, but to say, yeah, no, actually, factually speaking, when you hear the receipts, that makes no sense. And when you have photographic evidence and multiple photographic evidence so that people can say, you made that up. It's like, well, I have like 6 photos of other presidents doing this, and you could find them yourself. That's an effective way of dealing with this moment, is to come back calmly with the receipts and not jump in howling and amping up the emotion of the moment, which is part of what the people making all these claims want, but to simply say, yeah, no, that's actually factually not true. When you got historians helping you with that, that's good, because they really do have the receipts. Kevin Cruz has been online really firing back in such a powerful way, because he ultimately, one of the things he does very well on social media is he always has the receipts, right? He's like, yeah, no, that's not true. And let me give you a little guided tour through history to show you the many ways in which that's not true. So he's been out there really pushing back and saying, yeah, this is nonsense. But right now, some of that nonsense is coming from some press outlets in a way that, again, I should be able to say is unbelievable, and at this particular moment, clearly isn't.
Yeah, in the chat, we've been talking about the younger people who are reporting live from the convention. David Hogg is one that I've mentioned here that I've been particularly impressed with, but there's several others, and they have been fact checking like crazy. And kids are listening to them, like they tune into them. There was a young man who was asked to speak. I can't think of his name now. He had graduated from law school, but he was listed as a law school graduate / media influencer, and he's in his early 20s. And I mean, they are just fact checking in real time. So
and I want to make a comment about that, because you're absolutely right. I do want to say Kevin Cruz is on Blue Sky and Threads. He's not on Twitter anymore, but he's saying a lot on Blue Sky and Threads. But your comment, and maybe next week the press will be the topic, because one of the interesting things is, so immediately after the convention, there was like an attack on the content creators, the influencers who were invited to the DNC, right? They're not real journalists. Well, we're at a transitional moment for the press right now. And if you're saying whatever's going on right now doesn't look like what I'm used to, and so it's bad, not a useful response. And we're watching the press being asked questions of a sort they're not used to getting asked, being treated in a way they're not used to being treated, meaning like, no, we don't just kowtow to you, and no, just because you demand to be at the center of every story, that doesn't mean you are anymore. There are other people, right, who are not bloggers, we're not real journalists. Now the content creators are not real journalists. The question here isn't who is a real journalist or who isn't. It's who is seeking information and who is reporting on it, and how reliable is that information. The Harris people were very smart to include these people. We can see what they're doing and read it and evaluate for ourselves. But to point to that and say, it doesn't count. I thought about this a lot yesterday, because it's the exact parallel of anybody can be a historian, right? And then historians saying that person's not a real historian. Well, it depends on how you define real historian. There can be people who don't have a PhD and who do historical work who are great. There can be people who don't have a PhD and are not trained and do historical work who are really not great. The training offers you a lot of expertise, a lot of tools, a toolbox, ways to judge content, ways to frame arguments. I'm not saying journalistic education and expertise doesn't matter. I'm not saying training as a historian doesn't matter, but I am saying you have to evaluate the moment that you're in and the people offering different kinds of content, and decide for yourself what that means and what they're doing and how it might be offering something different from traditionally what has been offered and what that means. It's not that long ago on the historian front that historians were just not writing books aimed at the public at all, right? They were like, journalists writing popular history, and academic historians were only supposed to write for each other. When I put out my first book, it was a freaking big deal that I meant it to be both for academics and the public. This was like a thing. All the press is commented. It's a bridge book was what they called it, right? So things change and moments change, and you have to reevaluate how you're evaluating things. And I think that's true now. We're at a kind of transformative moment in the press and in the way that news and politics is being reported. And we don't know how that's going to turn out yet, but pointing to the content creators and saying they're not real journalists, that they don't count. You're looking back and you're not looking forward, and you're not just evaluating what's going on in the moment that we're in and then deciding what works best. Okay, stepping off soapbox. Yes.
All right. Our good friend Troy put in a Harry Potter reference, which I'm not a Harry Potter person. He said, aren't Republicans just Bogarts? But I don't know what that means. So maybe he'll need to explain that.
I don't know what that means either. It makes me feel like I'm an old.
No, I'm not. I'm a little, I think we're around the same age, but I'm just not into the wizards and stuff. My nieces and nephews all read them and they loved them. And I bought them the books, but I just didn't get into them. But
I read one. I think I'm older.
I read one and it was like, anyway, that's just me. But he does have, as always, a good question. He said, is there a direct correlation between Republican fear at losing and them going low, even lower than?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, for sure. And I see that Emma, the tour guide, says Bogarts are, I know, I just love that you are now that person forever, Emma. Bogarts are your fears manifested in real life. Okay. So the question is, are going low has to do with Republican fear?
Fear of losing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The more desperate, the nastier, the lower they go means they're really scared and they don't have content. They're not saying, we have a different vision for America. They're saying, nah, 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 nah. They don't have a lot. They're not throwing a lot back. But yeah, the degree of the nastiness is sort of opposite the degree of panic, which is why it's going to get worse. They're going to find new ways to be low because low gets them attention. They're going to hope that some of it sticks, but it does represent fear. And it represents the acknowledgement that things are not going swimmingly. And that's important to remember too, right? That some of what we're seeing, the extreme response, is a very clear indication that they're really worried. That doesn't mean that we should say, oh, good, it's all good, things are going well. It means that we should say, keep moving ahead, keep doing what you need to do, push for what you want. This is a close contest. But it's important to see that the people throwing some of that mud clearly are doing it in part because they feel out of control to some degree. Same reason why some of the press, not all the press, and definitely not all reporters, but some of the press is talking about itself a lot and trying to insist how important they are. They are important, but right now, for them to be saying, as I saw someone say, the first question that ought to be asked of Harris at the interview is, why did you take this long to meet with the press? And I responded to that on social media by saying, the first question should be about the press? Really? Like, you have the candidate, we need to talk to her. And then you sit her down and you want to say, I need to talk about how you're relating to us. How about asking questions about the candidate? So again, as I said at the end of the episode, really thinking about why people are doing what they're doing, judging the temper in every meaning of that word of what they're throwing out and what that says about their mindset, and enabling yourself to try and really get a read on people from what you're seeing and not just from what they're presenting. That's important. That's a political strategy.
Yeah. This is a new, I don't know if they've been a lurker, but I don't remember getting a question from this person. So welcome if you're new. It says C Layton. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, but they're asking about, they said that there's been a conspiracy theory going around that if Donald J. Trump is elected, then the plan is to immediately replace him with J.D. Vance via the 25th Amendment. So they were wondering if you wanted to comment on that. I've heard the same thing, saying they were going to do that with Biden, and then as soon as he got elected, put Harris in there, but that was like a few months ago. So
I have no idea. And there are conspiracy theories coming out on all sides from everyone. Sometimes from people that you're like, really? Like, you're moving into conspiracy theory territory? I don't know. I don't know. And there's another case in which someone comes up with a theory and you're like, maybe that's true. That's a moment to pause and take a breath and think, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And the person saying it doesn't know, neither do I. You know, all you can do is look for good evidence and evaluate what you're seeing and hearing at this point. Because uh, I'm again, I shouldn't be surprised at anything, but still, I'm like, really? Another conspiracy theory? And on in this case, on both sides, right? And I understand it because conspiracy theories happen when you honestly are sort of out of the norm and you can't understand what's going on and you want to understand it desperately, so you create stories. There's a Gordon Wood, historian Gordon Wood, and his advisor Bernard Bailyn, when they were writing about the American Revolution, they talked about conspiracy theories, the role of conspiracy theories in the revolution, because revolutionaries in the colonies couldn't understand what was going on, and the only way they could was, it's a plot. There are evil members of parliament who are advising the king, and together they're plotting to, and they created conspiracy theories to explain what was going on because they were desperately trying to figure out what was going on. The paranoid style. Gordon Wood wrote an article on it, which I can't remember the name of right now, and maybe some of our magical reference people can find it. And it might have even had the word conspiracy in the title. It was an article. It came out in a little collection, 4 Wood articles, and the book is, I think, in my Connecticut apartment. But at any rate, I know that in Bernard Bailyn's book on the ideological origins of the American Revolution, he talks about the pamphlets. He read a lot of pamphlets from the American Revolution, and they were, always sort of making claims and having all kinds of, seemingly paranoid arguments in them. And Bailyn was, a really early person who said, what if they're not all a bunch of crazy people? What if they actually believe some of this stuff? And what if we think about that? What if we think about the fact that this felt real? What if we think about the fact that this actually represents the mindset of the time at the moment to some people? So anyway, once again, stepping on the soapbox, but there has been, this kind of stuff has been written about the American Revolution and the fact that American revolutionaries were thinking about conspiracies, and they were doing it for really logical reasons. There are moments when it's like, the human psyche immediately jumps into, I must find an explanation. And sometimes there is one, and sometimes it really is just events stumbling over each other.
All right. We're 1 minute over. Do we want to try? Okay, Dave has put several questions in, but I really like this one the best. So this is the one I'm going to go with. He wanted to know if you could kind of compare and contrast the impact of the telegraph to the impact of social media in this election cycle.
Oh, I will very much. That's my kind of question.
That question.
But before I do that, I do want to point out that Tim, of course, came up with the article, Conspiracy and the Paranoid Style, Causality and Deceit in the 18th Century by Gordon Wood, William and Mary Quarterly, because that's Tim who found it. Thank you, Tim.
Rankmeister.
I know. So the question is comparing the telegraph and social media.
The influences on campaigns. I think that's,
and their influences on campaigns. So what the telegraph did and what social media is doing, well, it did many things, but one of the things that it did is it removed control from the traditional press. What you used to have in Washington, for example, before the telegraph, was a small community of journalists. Their identity was known. They would sit in the press galleries in the House and Senate. They would report on what was happening. Everyone knew who they were. They could go to them and say, how are you going to describe this? No, that's not really what happened. It was a controlled universe. The telegraph comes along, and what that means is within an hour, you can see something in the House, go to the telegraph and get it anywhere in the nation, and suddenly you've got unknown journalists and others from around the nation sitting in Congress and watching what's going on. And they know that they can watch what they want to, what they're watching, say what they want to say, and get it out into the press universe in a way that wasn't possible before. So suddenly, members of Congress don't know who the press is. Absolutely. There isn't a closed community. members of Congress lose control, the traditional press loses a degree of control. And so what the Telegraph does in part is take a closed, controlled system and just blow it open. And part of what that does is, and I experienced this as a researcher, you research in newspapers from the late 1840s and 1850s, and you sometimes can't tell what's true because the Telegraph like reports it. And it'll even say some newspapers on the front page, they had a column and it would just say telegraphic, right? It's like the new technology. Look what we found. And when you read updates on one story, you'll see like this happened. Oh wait, no, this. Wait, oh, actually this. Actually nothing happened at all. So the technology meant that no one was really in control in the way that there had been people in control before, and it blew open that whole information cycle. On the one hand, there was more news spreading more quickly to more people. On the other hand, it was kind of a loose cannon atmosphere where no one quite knew what was going where. And in a sense, I don't have to make that parallel. Social media does much the same thing, in which people say something, they blast it on social media. Depending on how they blast it, other people pick it up, they blast it, it goes all over the place. And the traditional gatekeepers of news and public statements from candidates in an election no longer control that narrative. And some of what we're seeing from some parts of the press now is a lament about that fact. Not framed that way, but it's like, wait a minute, they should be coming to us. We should be at the center of the narrative. We should be the one constructing and framing what's going on here. What's wrong with these people? That's testimony to people who are used to things being one way and watching partly social media. And because of social media, you get content creators and all of these new Zoom. I talked about this, I think last week, that Zoom allows a different kind of campaigning. Very similar idea in that a closed, controlled environment when it comes to reporting on politics is no longer closed and controlled in the same way. And that allows for innovation, and that allows for new and exciting ways of doing things. And it allows for some complete invention and a little bit of insanity. And that's where we are. And it's fascinating, the degree to which I'm fascinated by watching new technology, or not new, but technology is being used in new ways during a campaign, the moment that we're in. Fascinating to me. But again, as ever, I'm also watching as an American citizen and thinking, yeah, wow, this really, no one's controlling this. like that's a really good question in part, because we're all, no matter how educated or uneducated we are, no matter how into politics or not into politics we are, to some degree, we're all wallowing through a big sea of stuff, trying to figure out for ourselves what's believable at a moment when it's so important to reckon with what's going on, what's being said, the politics of the moment, and what it means. Okay, I'm now blasting and going way over. Okay, so I'm gonna here's what's gonna happen now. Tim has gone wild with Gordon Wood articles now. Thank you, Tim. So let me explain what's going to happen now. Now we're going to go to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording, so that we can be even freer and easier with whatever the heck we want to talk about. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too, poof, will be in the after party. As ever, I want to thank you all for coming here, for being here, for this conversation. And the conversation of democracy is always important. Given what we were talking about today, and given the questions about how do you know what to believe, this becomes even more important, because we need to be hashing this stuff out together, folks. We're going to be living in a sea of nastiness, not just until November, but for sure it's going to be on an upswing through November. We need to come together and sort it out and ask questions. That should be happening all over the place with lots of communities and lots of people. People should be coming together and asking questions and trying to sort things out with each other, right? That's democracy. That's a good thing about democracy is you can come together with other people who are all affected by the thing you're affected by and try and figure it out. Democracy is community, and community helps democracy. Okay, I also want to, besides thanking all you guys for coming, the Wonderful History Matters community, I want to thank my partner in crime, Annie, and I want to thank Claire, and I want to thank Jessica and John and the NCHE for making this wonderful community possible. And I have no idea what I'll talk about next week because who the heck knows what's going to happen in the next hour. Maybe I'll talk about the press some, I don't know. But at any rate, thank you guys for coming. And I guess if I don't think I've forgotten anything, I guess we can segue to the after party.